Hello, I'm Johnny. 16 years ago, Melissa and I lived in a haze of passion and possibility. I was fresh into my career as a software engineer, just starting to see real money, and Melissa was on track to become a pediatric nurse. She loved kids, and I loved her. Back then, everything felt aligned. We didn't plan to start a family so young, but when Emma came along, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like a miracle. Emma was this tiny bundle of energy with Melissa's blue eyes and my nose, and from the second she was born, she took over our world. We shifted into parenthood faster than I thought possible. Late-night feedings, doctor's visits, the works. Melissa and I had wedding plans, too. A big celebration with Emma as our flower girl. By the time Emma was 5, everything seemed perfect. Or maybe I was blind to the cracks already forming. The cracks widened fast. It started with whispers at work. A coworker pulled me aside one day in the break room, their face apologetic, their tone hushed. "Johnny, I saw Melissa with someone at the gym." I laughed it off, told them Melissa worked out all the time. But their expression didn't budge, and something about their hesitance planted a seed of doubt. The truth came out 2 weeks later. Melissa wasn't just at the gym, she was there with him. A trainer. 2 years, she said. She was calm when she admitted it, like she'd been rehearsing the moment. We stood in our cramped Seattle apartment, Emma asleep in the next room, and she said she wanted freedom. She called it space to breathe. I tried to make sense of it. Freedom from what? From me. From Emma. She didn't sugarcoat anything. Motherhood felt like a trap, she said. A role she never really chose. That one hit like a slap. She left that night with a duffel bag and never looked back. Emma was too young to fully grasp what had happened, but kids sense things. For weeks, she asked when Mommy was coming home, and I had no answers. I was too busy trying to survive the storm Melissa left behind. My parents stepped in to help, always there with casseroles and encouragement. Even Melissa's parents, embarrassed and heartbroken, showed up more than she ever did. Therapy became a lifeline for both me and Emma. At first, Emma thought the sessions were pointless. She didn't like the idea of talking to strangers about her feelings. But over time, they worked. She stopped blaming herself for Melissa's absence and started to see the strength in our little duo. I threw myself into single parenthood. Mornings were chaotic, packing lunches, braiding Emma's hair while half asleep, juggling conference calls and soccer practices. But we found our rhythm. We started new traditions: Friday night movies, pancake breakfasts, road trips to places Melissa had always been too busy for. And Emma grew. She's 15 now, sharp as a tack and fiercely independent, with a sarcastic wit that keeps me on my toes. The past 10 years have been about moving forward, one careful step at a time. Melissa became a ghost, an occasional name in the therapist's office or a fleeting memory that Emma would bring up before shrugging it away. I told myself she was gone for good. People like her don't come back. They burn bridges and move on. But ghosts have a way of haunting. It started 2 weeks ago. A knock on the door, late afternoon, right as I was wrapping up work. Emma was still at volleyball practice. The house was quiet. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was a delivery or someone selling solar panels. But something drew me to the door, and when I opened it, there she was. Melissa. Her face was thinner, sharper, like time had carved away the softness I remembered. Her hair, once meticulously styled, hung loose and uneven around her shoulders. She had a cautious smile, one I didn't trust. "Johnny," she said, her voice too casual for the weight of the moment. I stood there, frozen, every nerve in my body screaming at me to shut the door. Instead, I stepped aside, letting her into a house she hadn't set foot in for a decade. She took in the living room like it was a museum exhibit, her eyes darting to the family photos on the mantel. All of them were of me and Emma, her first day of middle school, her 8th grade graduation, our road trip to Yellowstone. Melissa's face flickered with something unreadable, but she didn't comment. "I needed to see you," she said, sinking into the couch like she belonged there. I stayed standing. "Why now?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Melissa didn't get the benefit of my patience anymore. She exhaled, folding her hands in her lap. "It's a long story. I've been through a lot. I've changed. That word twisted in my gut. People don't just change, not in the ways she needed to. But I let her talk. She told me about leaving the trainer after a few chaotic years. About bouncing between relationships, none of them lasting. She described a party lifestyle that spiraled out of control until COVID hit her like a wrecking ball. She almost died, she said. Spent weeks in the hospital, thinking about everything she'd lost. It all sounded rehearsed, like a script she'd practiced in the mirror. I didn't interrupt. I wanted her to finish so I could figure out where this was going. I made mistakes, Johnny, she said, her voice trembling. I want to make things right. With you. With Emma. I laughed before I could stop myself. The sound startled her, and I saw a flicker of anger behind her composed facade. Make things right. I repeated. You don't just get to show up and undo 10 years of damage. That's not how it works. Her eyes softened, tears pooling at the edges. I'm trying. I've changed. I want to be part of Emma's life again. Please. I didn't have an answer for her, not then. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw her out and slam the door behind her. Another part wanted to protect Emma from this mess altogether. But mostly, I wanted to understand why she thought she had the right to waltz back into lives she'd abandoned. Before I could respond, the sound of the garage door opening broke the silence. Emma was home. Melissa's face lit up, hopeful and desperate, but I stepped in front of her before she could move. Not like this, I said, my voice low and firm. She hesitated, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue. But she nodded, gathering her purse and heading for the door. I'll be back tomorrow, she said softly, as if I'd invited her. I didn't stop her. Instead, I watched her leave, my mind spinning with questions I wasn't ready to face. When Emma walked in, sweaty and smiling from practice, she didn't notice anything was wrong. I didn't tell her. Not yet. I needed time to figure out how to protect her from whatever storm Melissa was about to bring into our lives. The next morning, Melissa was back. I heard the knock before my first coffee, her timing impeccable. I wanted to ignore it, let her stand outside until she gave up and left. But Melissa never gave up, not when she wanted something. I opened the door, still in my sweats, and leaned against the frame. This isn't a good time. She didn't budge. I need to see Emma. I stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind me. The air was crisp, biting. You don't get to walk in here like nothing happened. She's not ready for this. I'm not ready for this. Her expression hardened. She's my daughter, Johnny. I have a right. A right. My voice cut through the quiet morning. You lost that when you left. You don't get to waltz in and call the shots. It's not about you anymore. Her mouth pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought she'd argue. But instead, she nodded, looking away. I'm staying at a motel nearby, she said. I'll come by later. I didn't respond. I waited until she walked off, her shoulders hunched against the cold, before going back inside. Emma was still upstairs, blasting music in her room while she got ready for school. She had no idea her mother had been at the door. I wanted to keep it that way, but I knew Melissa wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. That evening, I told Emma everything. We sat at the kitchen table, her homework forgotten in a pile of textbooks and half-sharpened pencils. She listened quietly, her face unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. She wants to come back. She says she's changed, I said, my tone skeptical. Emma let out a short laugh, the sound bitter. Changed? After 10 years? What does she think, that she can just show up and be my mom again? Her words stung, but they weren't wrong. I wanted to shield her from this, to protect the calm we'd worked so hard to build. But Emma wasn't a child anymore. She had her own mind, her own strength. She'll try, I said carefully. And she'll probably push hard. But you don't have to see her if you don't want to. Emma tilted her head, studying me. What do you want? The question caught me off guard. It's not about me. It kind of is. Her voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. You've been the one raising me. You've done everything she didn't. So, what do you want? I didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense. Melissa didn't wait long to press her case. She started showing up daily, timing her visits for when Emma got home from school. I tried to intercept her every time, but Emma insisted on handling it herself. Their conversations were polite at first. Surface level. Emma was cordial, but distant. She didn't let Melissa in, not emotionally, not physically. I watched from the kitchen window as Melissa tried to bridge a gap she'd created, her hands gesturing, her voice soft and pleading. Emma stood there, arms crossed, giving her nothing. "She's persistent," Emma said one evening, slamming her backpack on the counter. "She always was," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Emma shook her head, laughing humorlessly. "She doesn't get it, does she? She thinks she can guilt me into letting her back in." I didn't know what to say. Emma was handling this better than I expected, but I could see the cracks forming. Her jokes were sharp, her patience thinner. And beneath her sarcasm, I saw the hurt Melissa's presence was stirring up. One night, after Melissa had finally left, Emma sat beside me on the couch, staring at the dark screen of the TV. "She missed everything," she said quietly. "My first day of school. My first goal in soccer. The time I got the flu so bad you had to carry me to the hospital." Her voice wavered, and I put an arm around her, pulling her close. "She did," I said. "But you didn't need her then, and you don't need her now." Emma nodded, her head resting against my shoulder. "I don't think she's changed, Dad. I think she's lonely." I didn't disagree. Melissa didn't want Emma, she wanted redemption. And redemption wasn't something she'd find here. Melissa ramped up her efforts in the days that followed, finding new ways to push herself into our lives. She started lingering outside Emma's volleyball practices, showing up at the coffee shop Emma liked to study in after school. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't welcome. "Is she stalking me now?" Emma asked one evening, dumping her gym bag on the floor. "She was waiting by my car today. It's getting weird." I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to stay calm. "I'll talk to her," I said, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. Melissa had become a fixture, a shadow we couldn't shake. The next day, I met her at the coffee shop she seemed to favor. She was already there, sitting by the window with her hands wrapped around a mug. She looked up when I walked in, her face lighting up in a way that made my stomach turn. "Johnny," she said, smiling. "Join me." I didn't smile back. I slid into the seat across from her, my voice low and firm. "This has to stop." Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "The unannounced visits. Showing up where Emma is. You're pushing too hard, Melissa. She's not ready for this." "Neither am I." Her expression hardened. "I'm her mother, Johnny. I have a right to see her." "There's that word again," I said, my tone sharp. "You don't have any rights here. You gave those up when you left. You think you can guilt her into letting you back in? That's not how this works." She looked away, her fingers tightening around her mug. "I'm trying," she said quietly. "I'm trying to fix things." "Fix what?" I asked, leaning forward. "Do you even know what you broke? You missed everything, Melissa. Every milestone. Every hard day. Every good day. You don't get to come back now and act like none of it happened." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't stop. "Do you even know her? Do you know what she likes, what she hates? Do you know the hours I spent sitting with her while she cried because she thought it was her fault you left? You don't get to erase that pain with a few coffee shop meetings." She didn't respond. Her silence felt like a victory, but it was hollow. I stood, tossing a few bills on the table for her coffee. "If you really want to fix things, you'll stop forcing yourself into her life. You'll give her the time and space she deserves. And if you can't do that, then stay away. For good." I walked out without looking back, my hands trembling. I hated the way she made me feel, angry, helpless, like I was still cleaning up her messes after all these years. That evening, Emma found me in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She leaned against the counter, watching me for a moment before speaking. "Did you talk to her?" she asked. "I did," I said, keeping my focus on the cutting board. And I told her to back off. To give you space." Emma nodded, her expression unreadable. "Good." She didn't say anything else, but her presence felt heavier, like she was carrying more than she let on. I put down the knife and turned to face her. "Are you okay?" I asked. She shrugged, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's weird, I guess. Having her around again. I don't want her here, but part of me wants to understand why she left. Like, was it really because of me?" I stepped closer, putting a hand on her shoulder. "It was never because of you," I said firmly. "She made her choices, and they had nothing to do with you. Don't let her make you think otherwise." Emma's eyes glistened, and she blinked quickly, looking away. "I wish it was easier to forget," she murmured. "So do I said quietly. "But we'll get through this. Together." Emma nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thanks, Dad." We finished dinner in silence, the air heavy with unspoken thoughts. Melissa might have stirred up the past, but she hadn't broken us. Not this time. Melissa didn't come around the next day. Or the day after that. The silence should have felt like relief, but instead, it hung over me, sharp and waiting, like the lull before a storm. By the weekend, Emma and I were back to our routines. Saturday mornings were for errands and pancakes. She tackled her homework at the kitchen table while I balanced the checkbook and flipped through bills. Normal. Until my phone buzzed. "Melissa, we need to talk. One last time. Coffee shop. Noon." I stared at the screen, the words blurring together. Part of me wanted to ignore it, let the message sit unanswered until it faded into irrelevance. But this was Melissa. She didn't fade. At 11:59, I walked into the cafe. She was already there, dressed sharper than usual, pressed blazer, perfect hair, like she thought she could mask years of absence with a polished image. I sat down, crossing my arms. "Make it quick." She took a deep breath, folding her hands on the table. "I've been thinking about what you said, about everything I've missed." And her lips trembled, her voice low. "You're right. I wasn't there. I failed her. I failed you. And I can't undo any of it." I said nothing, waiting. "I've spent the past 10 years running," she continued. "From my mistakes, from my guilt, from the mess I made. I thought, if I could come back, if I could fix things, maybe I'd feel whole again. But I see now, it's not about me." Her words hung in the air, unexpected. Honest, maybe. But honesty came too late. "I'll step back," she said, her eyes glossy. "I'll give her space. But please, don't shut me out completely. If she ever wants to see me, if she ever asks." "She'll make that call," I interrupted. "Not you. Not me. Emma decides. And until she's ready, you stay away. No surprise visits. No showing up at her practices or her favorite spots. You've done enough damage, Melissa. Let her heal." She nodded, her face pale. "Okay." It should have felt like closure, but it didn't. I left the cafe with the same weight I'd carried in, the echoes of her regret swirling in my head. At home, Emma was curled up on the couch, a textbook open in her lap. She glanced up when I walked in, her face cautious. "Was it her?" she asked. "Yeah. And?" "She says she'll give you space," I said, sinking into the armchair across from her. "No more unannounced visits. It's up to you now, Em. If you want to see her, or if you don't, it's your choice." Emma didn't respond right away. She stared at the pages in front of her, her fingers tracing the edges. "I don't think I'm ready," she said finally. "That's okay," I said. "Take your time. You don't owe her anything." She nodded, her shoulders relaxing. "Thanks, Dad." I smiled, the first real one in days. Melissa's return had stirred up the past, but it hadn't broken us. If anything, it made our bond stronger. For now, we had peace. And for now, that was enough. Weeks passed. True to her word, Melissa stayed away. No texts, no calls, no sudden appearances. It felt strange at first, like waiting for the other shoe to drop. But as the days slipped into weeks, the tension that had gripped our home started to fade. Emma fell back into her routines. Volleyball practice, study groups, weekend hangouts with her friends. The brightness in her smile returned, and the laughter I'd missed hearing filled the house again. I didn't realize how much Melissa's shadow had lingered until it was gone. One evening, Emma joined me in the living room. I was flipping through the channels, aimlessly landing on a wildlife documentary, when she plopped onto the couch beside me. "Hey," she said, pulling her legs under her. "Hey," I replied, glancing at her. "What's up?" She hesitated, chewing the inside of her cheek. "I've been thinking about Mom." I turned the volume down, waiting. "I don't want to see her." "Not yet," she said quickly, as if she needed to get the words out before they got stuck. "But I've been wondering why she came back now. Like, after all this time." "Guilt, probably," I said, leaning back. "Or maybe she finally realized what she lost. I don't think even she knows for sure." Emma nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Do you think she'll stay away?" "If she doesn't, I'll make sure she does," I said firmly. "But it's your call, Em. Whenever you're ready, or if you're never ready, it's entirely up to you. She doesn't get to decide anymore." Emma gave a small smile, her shoulders relaxing. "Thanks, Dad." We sat there for a while, the documentary droning on in the background. It was quiet, peaceful, the way it used to be before Melissa's return had stirred up old wounds. Later that night, as I cleaned up the kitchen, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Melissa. "Thank you for letting me see her again, even briefly. I won't push anymore. I'll wait, however long it takes." I stared at the message for a moment before locking the phone and setting it aside. No response felt necessary. As I turned out the lights and headed to bed, I thought about the years ahead. Emma would be off to college soon, starting her own life. Melissa might linger in the background, always hoping for another chance, but the past had taught me that moving forward wasn't about erasing the scars. It was about wearing them, owning them, and refusing to let them define us. Emma and I had built something strong, something Melissa's mistakes couldn't undo. And while the road ahead might hold its own challenges, we'd face them together, just like we always had. For now, the house was quiet, the night still. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like everything was as it should be.